Hey everyone, my name is Mr. Francy and welcome back to Mr. Francy Reads. Today I'm doing my CSL number 6, that is completed SAS list series number 6 of The Eldest Curses. For those of you who don't know, I like to do a series where I discuss a series on my channel where I discuss book series that I've completed that were placed onto my SAS list. For those of you who don't know, SAS stands for Serious About Series. It was something that was thought up by Elizabeth from Lizzie Faye Loves Books, where you put a number of series onto a list that you would like to complete that year. Every time I complete a series, I like to do a review of them, and therefore I came up with my CSL completed SAS list series numbers. So this is number 6, and it is The Eldest Curses. Before I get into The Eldest Curses review, I just want to let you all know that I originally pegged this as a duology, but apparently Cassandra Clare, who is the author of this duology, plans to release a third book in the series. Now, book 1 and 2 were actually released rather a long time ago. Book number 1 was first published in 2019, and book number 2 was published in 2020, but there was no plans for book number 3 to be released until at least late 2022, and we still don't have word on an exact release date for it as yet. I am marking this completed as a duology, but if book number 3 does actually come out, then I do look forward to reading it when it does. At the moment, it is considered to be called the Black Volume of the Dead. So if that does come out in the future, then I definitely will plan to read it. But for the moment, as it has not come out, we are viewing this series as a duology, with me having read the first 2 books, the only 2 books so far in that duology. Alright, so the first book is called The Red Scrolls of Magic, and the second book is called The Lost Book of the White. This book was co-authored. Not only is it authored by Cassandra Clare, who writes the entire Shadowhunters universe, which is a compilation of different series in a universe filled with Shadowhunters, fantastical creatures who are placed on Earth to battle against all the forces of evil, but it is also co-authored because Cassandra Clare writes this series alongside Wesley Chu. I still am yet to work out why Wesley Chu was writing this duology alongside Cassandra Clare. So if you know why that is the case, please do let me know in the comment section below. But if you've come here to find out why Wesley Chu was involved, it seems to be a mystery for me that I still don't understand as yet. So hopefully someone does know, and if that's you, let us all know in the comment section below, because I'm sure we'd all like to know why that is the case. Both of the books in this series are YA fantasies. So with book 1, which as I said is called The Red Scrolls of Magic, I gave that book 5 stars. And with book 2, which is called The Lost Book of the White, I gave that book 4 stars. So let's discuss this duology. Before I get into specific premises and thoughts and feelings on both of these books, I just want to explain how this series connects to the Shadowhunters universe as a whole. So the first series in the Shadowhunters universe that I read was the Mortal Instruments series. Now, that is a series of 6 YA fantasy books that are deemed to be the main series overall by the readers of this universe. And then there are other series that prop up here and there in timeline order, just varies here and there along the way, with different other Shadowhunter series that have something to do with Shadowhunters. However, this duology specifically links back to the main Mortal Instruments series, because in that series we meet Magnus Vane and Alec Lightwood, who are 2 men who end up in a relationship with the ship name of Malik. In the Mortal Instruments series, Malik are side characters. In this duology, they are placed front and center as the main protagonists of the duology. With that in mind, let's move on and talk about the premise of Book 1, The Red Scrolls of Magic. So, Alex and Magnus are finally going on a well-deserved overdue vacation, a celebration of their undying love. First stop, Paris. But not long after they arrive, Tessa shows up to warn them of the Crimson Hand, a cult that apparently Magnus started, has been going wild. Magnus doesn't want this to interrupt Alec's vacation, but Alec wants nothing more than to be there by Magnus's side through what will surely be a tough journey. So comes forth the greatest fantasy duo of all time, Malik, to do what they do best, stop evil in its tracks, only this time guided by their love for one another. So, to my thoughts on this first book, everything I needed and more. It just absolutely was fantastic. I've loved Malik ever since their first kiss and have been a hard shipper of them ever since. So to find a book where they both feature as the main characters made me so happy. The book features fighting scenes, which honestly I would have preferred it to just be a romance, but I appreciate the motivations they had to defeat the evil they were facing. It was also part mystery, and when the mystery was revealed, I was shocked. Fantastic book, and when I was done with this one, I couldn't wait to pick up book number 2. So let's go a little more in depth with book number 1. So I was very excited going into this book because of the fact that Malik were going to be front and center. In the first series that I read, the Mortal Instruments series, I am a series purist. You need to know that. So therefore, what that means is if I start a series and there are other series that connect to that series, I'm going to read the entire series I've begun first before starting a new series that connects to that series. Does that make sense? So I'm a series purist and I will always read it in the book order, number order of that series, which you don't always have to do. Cozy mysteries are a great example of that. You don't necessarily need to read each book in a cozy mystery series in order, but I do with every series that I read, and I will not pick up a series that relates to said series until I've completed the series that I have already started. The reason I'm bringing this up, and there is a good reason because it's very, very important, is because when it comes to Cassandra Clare's recommendations of the reading order, she actually recommends you read books 1, 2, and 3 of Mortal Instruments, then read the Red Scrolls of Magic, and then read books 4, 5, and 6 to wrap up Mortal Instruments. I did not know this. I actually didn't even know of the Eldest Curses series when I was reading the Shadowhunters series. And in fact, when I was reading the Shadowhunters series, I didn't know that there were other series that connected to that series in the Shadowhunters universe. So I read all 6 of the Shadowhunters books thinking they were the only series of that universe. So I have to say, having read both book 1 and book 2, that I do recommend, if you love Alec and Magnus, to do as Cassandra Clare suggests. Now, I'm not just saying this because Cassandra Clare suggests it, because there are other authors who have suggested other things that I personally don't recommend. If I don't recommend something, I'm not going to say that I do. But in this particular case, in book 4 of the Mortal Instruments series, Alec either doesn't feature or doesn't feature until right at the very end. So therefore, I highly recommend picking up The Eldest Curses after you've read book 3 because it explains where Alec is and why he's not featuring in book 4. Had I known that at the time, I would have done this because Alec, being my favorite character in this entire universe, and definitely in my top 5 favorite fictional characters of all time, was absolutely horribly missed in book 4 of the Shadowhunters series. So it would have served me well to read this book before reading book number 4. But anyway, there you go. That aside, my thoughts and feelings. Look, as I say, I love Malik as a couple. I have strong, strong, strong feelings for them as a couple. So to have a book where they feature front and center, I found to be amazing. To have a setup where they are going away on a vacation to spend time together as a couple was really, really beautiful. In fact, the book opens up with Cassandra Clare saying everyone deserves their own love story. And I feel like the start of the Red Scrolls of Magic was definitely that, a love letter from Cassandra Clare to all those of us who were hard Malik shippers in the original series. So I did appreciate that. But as I said, with my original thoughts and feelings, I did not necessarily appreciate that they had to fight forces of evil. Now, I get it. I looked up the genre of this book and it is fantasy and not romance. And because of that, there needed to be fantastical elements. And in most fantasies, there is going to be some sort of battle to do with some representation from the side of good versus the side of evil. So it inevitably did have to happen in a fantasy novel. I get that. But what annoyed me is a spoiler. So in this one, I'm going to be putting spoiler tags up intermittently on the screen. If you don't want to know the spoiler, scroll through until you no longer see the spoiler tag, and that's when I'll be coming back to give you some spoiler-free stuff. So putting a spoiler tag up on the screen right now, I'm going to discuss with you what annoyed me about the fantasy side of this book. Okay, spoiler, 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 you have been warned. Let's jump in. there is a word that YouTube doesn't allow me to say. So I'm going to spell a word for you, which isn't the way you spell this word, but you'll know what I mean. Let's spell this word. Seggs. Okay, you know what it means. If you can spell that in your mind and pronounce it in your mind, you know the word I'm trying to say that YouTube doesn't let me say. Okay. Alec and Magnus attempt to do this multiple times in this book, and every time they do, they are interrupted by a force of evil. This annoyed me. So I wasn't necessarily annoyed by the fact that there were fantastical elements, but it annoyed me that every time Alec and Magnus went to have SEGGS, that there would be a fantasy thing that would just jump through a wall, or they had a moment where they were in the shower together and then suddenly this thing just jumps through the shower to start attacking them. And it was, I started thinking suddenly, is the fact that it's called The Eldest Curses the fact that Alec and Magnus are cursed because anytime they try to get hot and heavy, some evil force is going to interrupt them? It just, to me, came across as annoying and frustrating as opposed to intriguing. So that was my thought on that. If I were to separate that is why, if I was to separate that is why from that is what the fantastical elements were, the fantastical elements on their own were great. I had a lot of struggles with the Infernal Devices, which is another series that connects to the Shadowhunters series, because the evil in that series was rather lame and rather disappointing for me. But the evil in this particular book and in book 2 were really fascinating. And so I enjoyed the battles themselves. I just did not enjoy the why. Okay, let's take the spoiler tag off the screen because that's all I needed to say. All in all, I really did enjoy this book. I loved meeting Shinyon, who is a character that we meet relatively early on because she wants to help them with regards to the Crimson Hand. I love that Tessa made an appearance. For those who don't know, Tessa is the main character from the Infernal Devices. So I love that there was a connection made there. And it seems like there were a lot of connections made throughout the course of this book. So while you absolutely can, and according to Cassandra Clare, should read this book after you've read the first 3 books in the Mortal Instruments series, there are characters that come up in this book that we have not been introduced to if you haven't read any of the other series outside of those first 3 books in Mortal Instruments. So just be mindful of that. I haven't. All I've read is Mortal Instruments and Infernal Devices and these 2 books. So they came in. I didn't know who they were, but I strongly suspect that when I read the other series, I'll be able to make those connections. I loved seeing Alec and Magnus together front and center. I loved seeing them having to fight these forces of evil together because of their undying love. That being the motivation worked really well for me. And I loved the idea of the Crimson Hand and how it actually originated and how it came to be. I'll leave that spoiler free, but if you've read the book, you know the backstory to the Crimson Hand. And I just found that to be absolutely hilarious. Yeah, so all in all, I gave it 5 stars. Yeah, yes, it did annoy me that the fantastical elements propped up when they did. Refer back to my spoiler section for that. But ultimately, looking at the fantastical elements separate and just looking at it on its own and then looking at the romance aspect, all in all, I found it to be an amazing book and gave it 5 stars. It was the love letter that Cassandra Clare wrote to Malik shippers. I'm one of them. I received it really well, and I'm so thankful that she wrote this book. So let's move on to the second book in this currently penned as duology. As I say, there's the third book that should be coming out at some point soon, but currently duology, which is this book, The Lost Book of the White. Okay, so let's talk about the premise of this book. Okay, actually, before we do, I need to think about how to discuss this, actually. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to put a spoiler tag up on the screen for a considerable amount of time, because I need to talk about something that occurs in this book that is a massive spoiler to not only this series, but also the Shadowhunters universe as a whole. So let's put that spoiler tag up. Scroll through if you don't want to hear the spoiler that I'm about to say. I will do a wrap up at the end that is spoiler free, but anything that I say in this book is going to be a massive spoiler for the entire, not only this duology, but the entire universe for Shadowhunters as a whole. So putting that spoiler tag up on the screen right now. All right, so I love this duology as a whole, but being that we're in the spoiler section, spoiler, you have been warned. Let's begin. We're beginning spoilers right away. I need to talk about Max. Okay, so for those of you who are still listening to the spoiler section who don't intend to pick up the series, I'll just give you a bit of a backstory as to my reading experience of the beginning of this book. So right at the beginning in chapter 1, Alec and Magnus are in bed trying to have SEGGS, and suddenly they are distracted once again, which, yes, gave me triggers from book 1. Like, seriously, why can't these two just consummate their love? But anyway, but the reason why is because they're hearing a screaming from a little boy whose name is Max, who is their child. The reason this needs to go under a spoiler tag is because at the end of book 1 in this duology, Magnus and Alec do not have a kid. So it doesn't make sense that we are picking up with book 2 and they have a kid suddenly. I did some research, and what I found out is that if you look at the reading suggestion that Cassandra Clare has for this duology, as I was saying earlier, you read book 1 after you've read book 3 in the Shadowhunter series. You read book 2 way late in the universe. This is like the third or second last book that you're meant to be reading in the entire universe as a whole. So, yeah, I kind of get that now, but I didn't get it at the time, and it goes back to when I was saying earlier in this video that I'm a series purist. If I read book 1, I'm going to read book 2 in that same series before I continue on. I wish I had known about the reading order and that it contained massive spoilers for the remainder of the universe as a whole, but not knowing that, went in, was really disappointed to find out what had happened. So apparently there is a novella in the Tales from the Shadowhunter universe or something, that Tales of Omnibus, and in one of those novellas, Alec and Magnus are at the Institute, the New York Institute, and a boy is taken to the Institute because no one loves him, with a note saying who could love this kid. And Miris, who is Alec's mum, is deciding what to do, and Alec and Magnus ultimately end up convincing her to let them adopt him because there is no way that they can naturally conceive a child, being two guys. And so ultimately they end up adopting this kid in that novella. And then we move forward with other stories in that omnibus. And then we get to this book, which is a considerable amount of time later with them being parents. So now that you know that, the basic premise of this book is that in this second book, Magnus and Alec have a child, Max. One night, the pair are disturbed while Max is crying out, and they rush to his room only to find Shin Yun and Ragnar Fell there. Thinking only of their child, the pair do everything they can to protect him, but that's when Shin Yun stabs Magnus with a Svefenthorn, which is a magical weapon, and they steal the powerful Book of the White. Mercifully, Max is okay, but who knows what Shin Yun and Ragnar Fell want with the Book of the White, and what will happen now that Magnus has been stabbed with the Svefenthorn. It's time to call the cast of Shadows from the Institute of New York to get the book back and work out what's happening with Magnus before it's too late. So to my thoughts, I experienced an overwhelming sense of whiplash at the beginning. To this point, I had only read all of the Mortal Instruments, most of Infernal Devices, and Book 1. And in that Book 1, as I said, Alec and Magnus don't have a child. So it was very weird for me to come to terms with this and get over not having met Max when Magnus and Alec did. In saying that, once I was on board with it, I enjoyed the book a whole lot more. We actually visit hell in this book, and I love seeing fantasy writers' interpretations of heaven and hell in books, and so too loved it in this one. It was also nice having the other New York Shadowhunters back, especially knowing they were the side characters this time. All in all, a good way to end the duology so far. There are rumours, as I say, that Claire will do the third book, and I'll be up for it if and when she does, but for now, this was a satisfying ending. Given that we have the spoiler tag up on the screen, I'm going to jump right into the ending. Okay, so we have the dream sequence with Tessa and Jem. Was it Jem? Oh gosh, I mean, it was a while, so you have to forgive me, but I think it was Tessa and Jem getting married. I'm just going to confirm that. Okay, so I was just a bit confused because I was trying to find in the book who was getting married and I couldn't find it in my book. And then I realized, so I was listening to the audio version of this book, which is fantastic. It was really hard for me to find, in fact, but found it eventually. And the narration was really, really good. But apparently in the first editions of The Lost Book of the White, this wedding was included, but it has not been included ever since. So it was between Jem and Tessa, and I found that to be really, really beautiful. It is obviously a massive spoiler that this occurred, but I don't know now if this took place in book 3 in Infernal Devices or not, because I DNF'd Infernal Devices, so I'd need to check with that. But I really appreciated the wedding. So there you go. Apparently it's only in the first editions of books, but it is also in audio narration from the audiobook. So go and check that out if you want to experience that wedding. But yeah, I really did appreciate that. I loved having the whole band of the New York Institute back together again. I loved seeing Izzy and Clary and everyone else, Jace and Simon. Simon, oh my gosh, Simon was very depressed. Obviously, there's a lot that has happened to Simon, and I am wondering if I'm going to find answers as to what happened with Simon between the end of book 6 in Shadowhunters through to this book, The Lost Book of the White, because obviously there were a lot of things that went down, and Simon's now a very dark type of character. I mean, I know that he was a vampire at one stage, but he's just, yeah, seems very dark and very down and very depressed. And he's a shadow hunter now too, to boot. When did he become a shadow hunter? Did I forget about that in the Mortal Instruments series, or did that happen again somewhere between the end of book 6 and now? So yeah, obviously I would highly recommend reading this in the Cassandra Clare order rather than being a serious purist like myself and reading books 1 and 2 of this duology one after the other, because it did give me a horrible feeling of whiplash. But in saying that, loved having the New York Institute back, loved seeing Izzy particularly, liked seeing Jace. Jace really actually annoyed me the further I went along in the Mortal Instruments world, but I think that was because of the choice to make Clary the protagonist, which makes sense because Clary is the one who starts off as a mortal, doesn't know about Shadowhunters, so we see it all through her eyes. I get that, that makes sense. But the problem that I have with the Mortal Instruments series is that Clary spent a lot of time getting lost in Jace's golden eyes when we needed to do a lot of fantasy stuff that wouldn't occur. So by proxy of that, Jace was annoying me in the Mortal Instruments, but I loved having him back here as a side character. So it was good seeing him again. Of course, I love Alec and Magnus. I love Magnus no matter what. Any scene that he's in, his fabulous self is there. It works for me. And it works even when I was doing my review for the Infernal Devices. I said one of the only 2 massive saving graces of the Infernal Devices for me was Magnus. Magnus being his fabulous self, and he is that. And the fact that he gets to step up and be a main character in these 2 books, but especially the second one, I absolutely love him and love that he was given that. But of course, I need to spend some time talking about Alec, because Alec not only is my favorite character from this entire universe, but is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. He is definitely in my top 5, if not higher than top 5 fictional characters of all time. So to watch Alec throughout the course of both of these books was just absolutely fantastic. I love that he and Magnus's relationship is so strong that regardless of what it is that they are going through, it is very hard not to notice that in both books, the driving force of everything that they deal with is because of Magnus. Alec doesn't care. He loves Magnus so much that he is there by Magnus's side, fighting against whatever Magnus is fighting against because of how much he loves him. If Magnus is in trouble, Alec is always going to be there and stand side by side with him to fight whatever comes their way. So I do appreciate the undying love that they have, even all this time later, with so for the sake of the timeline of the Shadowhunters universe with the Lost Book of the White. I love seeing that. I love that they have a kid, even though it did give me great whiplash because I hadn't read the story that led to it. I loved experiencing them be fathers, and even though we don't get to see a lot of that because Max is dropped off with Maris and the others at the New York Institute while they go and deal with what they're dealing with in this book, I did love seeing it at the beginning and at the end as well. I think they are both great fathers, and so yeah, really did enjoy that. Shin Yun, I think, has had an amazing character arc over the course of this duology. The fact that we find out the reveal at the end of book one that she was the traitor the whole time, I thought was fantastic because I did not expect her at all. And then, so the fact that Alec let her escape at the end of book one and just go with the hope that she would change her ways, and then she came back in book two not only not having changed her ways but worse than she was before, I think was a great motivating force and very realistic of Shin Yun. I loved the fantastical magic lore when it came to the Zvefanthorn, and the fact that we didn't know a lot about it to begin with, and then we learnt more as the book went on, I did find that to be very interesting. I found Samael not to be as intimidating in person when we finally met Samael, but I did love the lead up because unlike in Infernal Devices, where I was not at all intimidated by Mortmain, Samael comes across as just as intimidating, if not more intimidating, than Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter series before we meet him. It's that whole fear of the unknown, and there is so much built up with Samael. So I really did appreciate that. Yeah, overall, it was a really, really, really good book. It's enticing me to pick up the Tales of the Shadowhunter Academy so that I can fill in those gaps and learn more about particularly what was going on with Simon. And apparently Simon and Clary are Parabatai now, and I didn't know that either. So I want to see what's going on with that, and hopefully I'll learn that in the Tales of the Shadowhunters Academy omnibus as well. But otherwise, yeah, let's take the spoiler tag off the screen and wrap things up. All in all, I thought that both books were fantastic. So I gave, as I said, the Red Scrolls of Magic 5 stars, and if you're just joining me back now because this is spoiler free, I gave The Lost Book of the White 4 stars. It was still a good book. I just had a couple of cons here or there, but it was still really, really good. So overall, 9 out of 10 stars for the entire duology, which is a really high rating, and I do highly recommend it. Once again, I am a series purist. I do like to read books, every book in a series before moving on to another one, but I do highly recommend not doing that with this one because for those who didn't listen to the spoiler section, I mentioned in a spoilery way a lot of the whiplash I experienced with reading book 2 after book 1, because there are a lot of things that take place in between book 1 and book 2 in other books in this universe that if you haven't read them, you just feel like a fish out of water with everything. So I highly recommend reading book 1 after you've read book 3 in the Mortal Instruments series. And according to Cassandra Clare herself, so you read the first 3 books in the Mortal Instruments series, then you read Red Scrolls of Magic, then you read the 3 books in Infernal Devices, then you read the final 3 books in the Mortal Instruments, then you read the Bane Chronicles, then you read Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy, and then you read The Lost Book of the White. So, and then after that, there's the Dark Artificers and the Last Hours series, and looks like some potential standalones with Ghosts of the Shadow Market and the Shadowhunters Codex. So I would recommend actually following what Cassandra Clare is saying, as I said at the beginning of this video, because I won't always recommend what authors recommend if I feel with my experience differently, but in this case I do. It is absolutely essential for you to read the Bane Chronicles and Tales of the Shadowhunters Academy before The Lost Book of the White, because you have spoilers from The Lost Book of the White from those 2 books, and it feels unsettling not knowing what happened in those 2 books when reading this one. It just, yeah, lots and lots of whiplash for me. But just looking at these 2 books on their own, I thought they were incredible. I love that we had this love letter to the Malik shippers out there, and it was an amazing way to celebrate Alec and Magnus as characters, which I absolutely appreciated. So I do highly recommend them. I just recommend them in the reading order that Cassandra Clare gave, and I will go on to read the Bane Chronicles and Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy as soon as possible to fill in those gaps that I wasn't aware of prior to picking up book 2, and let alone after finishing book 2. But in the meantime, that is where I am going to leave it. So highly recommend this series, this duology, especially if you are a hard Malik shipper. Give it a go and tell me what you think. And if you have read it, let me know what you thought in the comment section below. Letting you all go with peace, blessings, and so much love. Please do be kind and love one another, and spread your sparkling energy all throughout the world. And until next time, happy reading. Bye, everyone.